Hey everybody, it's Anne again from SuperCharge Lab, and we are live with the AIP podcast again. And today, my guest is Matt Gierc, part engineer, part marketer, and all data. And that's how he describes himself. He has a history of working with companies to solve really difficult problems. And currently, he's a VP of product and marketing at 3AG Systems, where he focuses on helping companies pull insights from their data. 3AG Systems is an analytics firm with over a decade's experience helping companies get insight from their data. They specialize in data visualization, data engineering, and systems optimizations for companies in the mining, manufacturing, and services industries. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
It's going well. How are you doing, Anne?
It's great. It's great to have you on the podcast. And so, you know what? Before we dive right in, let's talk a little bit about you. What's your backstory? How do you think this business launched? What made you join this business, and what does 3AG Systems do?
Sure. Well, my background originally, I started out as an engineer. Quite honestly, I found that I wasn't the best engineer in the world, so I had to get into the business side, traveled the world a bit. And after a while, one of my close friends who I'd worked with years ago in one of the very early semiconductor startups reached out to me and said, "Hey, I've been working on this business now for 5, maybe 10 years, and you should really come back out west." And so I just had to take him up on his offer. So 3AG has been around now for 15 years, and the company got its start in the business intelligence and data engineering space. So it was doing consulting work, interestingly enough, for Microsoft back when big data and business intelligence wasn't even much of a buzzword. So it's been for the company's been around and been doing this for a very long time. And it's certainly had a lot of really interesting experience. And it's been really amazing to see how the industry has changed so dramatically. This went from being not a buzzword to suddenly everyone and their dog is doing this sort of thing.
That's amazing. Tell me a little bit about why you're so passionate about data. What's your role at 3AG Systems? What have you been
Mhm.
doing? Some notable projects maybe, and what really drove that passion to be built around data?
So personally, I'm a bit of a latecomer to the space. I worked a lot on the engineering and the technology side, but never as much directly on the data side. But since joining the company, it just blew my mind. And what really I think sort of clicked for me early on was the fact that all these companies, almost every company that I've ever encountered, is sitting on this massive, massive gold mine of information and data, but in most cases, they can barely access it or they have difficulty actually getting the insights from it in the first place. And so to me, that seems like an incredibly good opportunity, not only for us as a company that helps organizations to get that kind of insight, but for those organizations themselves in terms of being able to drive better operations or better financial performance.
Absolutely. So, I mean, you've worked with so many companies and industries, particularly with the data strategies. I'm sure you've heard of, many misconceptions about data. Let's talk
Hmm.
a little bit about some of these common misconceptions, and what are some ways that you've worked to address these misconceptions?
Yeah, well, I've seen a lot of these firsthand, either from prospecting with individuals or just getting into the nitty-gritty with them. I think the one that probably drives me the most crazy slash gives me the most opportunity is when people are saying something to the effect of, we just don't have enough data. And many, many times I've seen organizations that will use that as honestly an excuse to hold back. They'll say, look, we just need to be able to collect this much more data. And the challenge is they're never able to get that data that they think they need to collect. The flip side is that when you think about it, I mean, no company in the world would not be making decisions without data. They wouldn't be running their operations without data. It's really a question of how much of it have they actually formalized in terms of process for their decision making. And so that certainly is one of the biggest misconceptions that I see, and it's hard not to roll my eyes when I'm in person. So it's been helpful that to be able to be working remotely for a lot of these discussions. The other misconception, in my opinion, is one where companies feel that they need to jump ahead to the most advanced use case possible. Um, and so, in this particular case, they might be working with a firm that has an amazing new five or six different buzzword technology, and it's got captured the attention of one of the senior executives. And before you know it, everyone's talking about this particular technology. And that's fantastic. Like, it's amazing to get excited about these sorts of things. But on the flip side, if that same company is also planning their entire operations using spreadsheets and pivot tables, there's quite a dichotomy in how they're running their operations. And so while it's really good to go and focus on advanced new technologies, on the flip side, you need to make sure that you can walk before you run. And to go further than that, run before you strap on a jetpack and fly off into outer space. So we really think it's important for companies to make sure that they're grounded and get the basics and can get proper infrastructure in place before doing crazy stuff.
Absolutely. Do you think businesses today are flying blind when it comes to data? What do you believe certain organizations are lacking in this regard?
Yeah, that's also an interesting issue. So in some respects, yes, I would agree with that statement, but for different reasons. So if you're looking at a very small organization, often it becomes an issue of resourcing. They just don't have the skill set that would be required to do the proper infrastructure and to do the proper reporting. On the flip side, if you're in a very large organization, it's almost the opposite problem. There you get the more traditional silos that go into place. The finance team, or maybe a better example, the sales team doesn't talk with the marketing team, and all sorts of feelings get hurt, and people are all upset. But ultimately, what it comes down to is really a lack of connectivity between various systems and various departments. And so that's kind of what I'm referring to on the infrastructure side, where being able to make those connections in the first place means that you can start pulling a lot more insights. And so, interestingly enough, for two very different reasons, the smallest companies and the largest companies often have the same sort of troubles.
Absolutely. I absolutely hear you with that. So you've launched this program called the Data Coach. How have customers responded to the service, and who really needs a data coach?
Well, I've never had a bad data coach yet. So maybe everyone's just being really nice to us. We're up in Canada. We work with a lot of Canadian firms. Maybe they're just being polite. But on the flip side, what we found is that every company that has gone through it has felt that it's been a really good opportunity to get an assessment of where they are from a data and decision making process. And so, really, what the data coach is it's a process that allows us to get a good understanding of what a company does, what a client does, how they apply data in their decision making process, and then with that data, how they can actually, what sort of infrastructure is in place and what sort of reporting methodologies they use to be able to extract all of those insights. And so, to give an example, it really involves sitting down and interviewing and asking probing questions of the company and trying to tug at the thread to understand exactly what that company is doing in their decision making and what kind of gaps they have in the same decision making process. And so, by doing that, the data, after we've completed one of those interviews, we'll go back and we'll try to compare that against best practices for that organization and that organization's industry, and then come back with very clear recommendations on what they should be doing to get more data driven in their decision making process. And
Absolutely.
maybe to expand a little bit on that,
Mm-hmm.
companies fall into a spectrum of data proficiency. And so there's an analytics maturity model that we use, and it describes companies going from a descriptive, where they're really just sort of reporting on the past information, past history, into a diagnostic phase where they're now trying to dig deeper and understand why did something happen, then into the predictive phase where they're using that same information to try to make an educated guess about the future, and then finally into the prescriptive phase where they're actually using they're letting the data tell them what they should be doing. And being able to go through something like a data coach is a really helpful, it gives us a good opportunity to grade a company on that scale and give them a really honest assessment of where they fit, and more importantly, what they could do to actually move on to the next stage.
And that is so important, really, to know yourself and know where you stand in terms
Mhm,
of the data, uh, the data journey. So I believe you have a program called the Data Plus offering. Tell us a little bit
mhm.
about that.
So I also look after marketing, so you can see the very clever naming that goes in, all the thought that goes into our process. Data coach followed by data plus. You should see our insights line. There's just all sorts of insights products. But
Hmm.
basically, what Data Plus is, it's the follow through on Data Coach. And so the idea is that now that we've established sort of where a company is and what it is that they need to do, we want to be able to help them move along that journey. And traditionally, in a lot of IT projects, and even actually with our organization before we launched Data Plus, we would focus quite a bit on turning it into specific projects. So we'd like to recommend that you should build a data warehouse. You should also put in place some reporting using a more modern reporting platform, things like that. And while on the one hand, to us, they make perfect sense, some of these concepts can be a little obscure for organizations. It's not, and when we're talking about, hey, you need to build more infrastructure, that's really not something that people can get excited about. They love to look at fancy reports. They love to look at the insights, and more importantly, get the exciting AI use cases in place. But if you want to do plumbing and piping, well, we're not that keen on it, or we think it's important, but it's not that important. And so really there was this, in our view, it was a bit of a, how to describe it? There was a bit of a gap between what people knew they had to do and what they should be doing. And that's why we built out Data Plus. So with Data Plus, what we do is we work with our client to define the number of blocks or hours that they would be working on various projects every month. And then we divide it up because just like IT or pretty much anything related to operations, a good chunk of their time is going to be spent working on just keeping the lights on, dealing with fires that have popped up. And then whatever extra time they've got, they want to work on more strategic activities. And so what we do with Data Plus is that we provide the opportunity for an organization to let us take care of that activity. So we'll devote perhaps 50% of the time every month working on dealing with immediate issues as they pop up, and the other 50% of the time working on the more strategic projects with the goal of constantly working towards building out more and more of the roadmap that we were able to build up with the data coach process. And so what we find in working with clients with Data Plus is that it makes it significantly easier for clients to work towards those strategic long-term goals that they know they have to work on, but also the peace of mind of knowing that things aren't going to fall apart with any sort of legacy activities that are going on.
Absolutely. That is so important, to have a very structured manner in which you approach, your data strategy. So that's been so insightful and fascinating, Matt. We're coming to the end of the show. So, if you had a piece of advice that you would give to, someone who's aspiring to get into the data analytics and the data science side of the business, what would you say?
Honestly, just start doing it. At around the time when I started to realize, personally speaking, when I realized that this whole machine learning and AI thing was real and that it would have such a big impact on the world, I actually just started coding again and pulling down examples and really just trying to get things to work. And to me, that just getting your hands dirty with this type of technology, whether you're on the marketing side or, if you're actually doing the coding, makes a huge difference. And there's so many opportunities with so many organizations. Like we believe that every single company out there really needs to have a formalized strategy and practice in place, and they need to be working on improving everything, because if they don't, their competition is going to do it for them. And as a result, you could really be looking at pretty much every company in the world. If they don't have a dedicated data team, they're going to be looking to hire a dedicated data team over the next decade. And so, really, the most important thing that you could be doing is just to start doing it and getting yourself out there. And if you have any sort of passion for this type of work, it'll show and you'll be able to find those jobs pretty quickly.
Great. Well, Matt, it's been a thrill today having you on the show. What's a good way for anybody to reach you or find out more about 3AG and the work that you do?
I guess I should put a shout out for the AIP. Obviously, that's one way that you can get a hold of us. But of course, you can check us out at 3agsystems.com and tell them Matthew sent you.
Great. Well, thanks for being on the show today, Matt. It's been a pleasure, and I wish you the very best. And yeah, keep it cool.
Cool. Thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure.